Aaron Keller made a post where he basically talked about that they're going to be discussing the talk about 6v6 in an upcoming developer update. Here's the tweet for those that haven't seen it yet, and I just wanted to give my thoughts on this and what I think about 5v5 versus 6v6. Anybody who has followed this channel knows that I want Overwatch to be fun to play and rewarding to play, and for that reason, I'm not overly, 5v5 or 6v6, but I will say when it does come to that argument, I've begun to lean more and more towards moving towards a 6v6 simply because I personally feel that the balance team or, the hero design team or whatever you want to call it, they are unable to figure out how to approach the tank problem, in an effective way where we can say that yes, perhaps they have shown some progress. Now they've definitely done some things that are much better than before. The new healing passive is not as broken as a lot of people thought. Even I said that, hey, let's wait this change out and then talk about it. Then you have, the tank changes where they're really hard to CC and boop around, which honestly has ruined some gameplay loops for how Lucio or Brigitte might interact with them and things like that. But it is what it is. This is the 5v5 effect. However, I want to really sit down and talk about, is this the solution to making tank better? Aaron Keller basically spoke in a dev blog that, I reacted to where I was very disappointed, where he basically said that, we are going to be making tanks tankier. In my personal opinion, this isn't the way forward. I believe that making tanks even tankier just reinforces the playstyle of perhaps, well, this tank may never die. It's now time to pick something that this character is weak against, and you end up just reinforcing the counterplay playstyle. And I've been talking about this a few videos back as well as a few streams back. This one is something I've not talked about in depth, but I do know that Overwatch in the upcoming quick play hack will be testing like upgraded role passives. I do want to see what they have in mind for that, but I've started to lean towards this idea that if Overwatch wants to stay in the 5v5 format, weirdly enough, I genuinely believe that we may have no choice but to go the Paladin's route of perhaps having hero cards that upgrade them across the game, lock characters into not being able to swap, develop these passives that help you counter other enemies, and we might just have to reshape the game if we want to stay in 5v5 like this. And you know what? I'm open to trying it, even though I think it's like really taking Overwatch in a completely different direction, that it might completely alienate what made Overwatch interesting to begin with. But sadly, this is the reality of staying in 5v5. Now, hypothetically, let's assume we go to 6v6. There is ways to solve certain problems. Is it going to solve every problem? Is it going to make tank feel perfect? No, of course not. I don't think in any format that's ever going to be the case. That's just like, let's be realistic here. We can talk about 5v5 and 6v6. However, 6v6 does allow one thing, is the division of attention between two different tanks, and that is something that doesn't get, it doesn't really get talked about people that do complain about the tank role on the forums or the reddits, where they're like, tank just feels miserable because I can go in and do whatever I want. Now, I have my own perspective on this. I do believe that at least on the lower elo end of this game, tank is really not that bad, and there's just a lot of bad tank players. A lot of people have been coming down to my stream and they've been seeing just how many terrible tank players are there in quick play that just play with their brains turned off. It's funny because I would even argue that, like, and I don't know if this is an effect of a character having so much HP and perhaps different ways to tank abilities, that tanks believe that they should be able to do whatever they want, however they want. But if you look at the way that perhaps some squishy like supports and DPS play, they have a little bit more discipline in the way that they approach the game. However, we don't necessarily see that in the tank role. You see a lot of tanks, in your metal rank games, perhaps even, even in your quick play games, you'll see a lot of these tank players that just run around like headless chicken with no, goal or an idea of how to play this tank inside. They just believe that, okay, I lock this character, I walk in, I should be able to win. And then, they feed, and then they're like, oh, tank's in a bad spot. Now, let me ask a question. Is that tank being in a bad spot, or is that you doing something wrong on tank? This is something that we also need to discuss. And that doesn't just apply to 5v5. That was something that was a problem in 6v6 too. I remember ranting about it way back when this channel was really small in Overwatch 1, when I made videos for, Overwatch 1. And my point in all of this, to bring everything together, is when it comes down to 6v6, we have to really evaluate 6v6 and 5v5, excuse me. We have to really evaluate where do we want Overwatch to go. Like the biggest problem from Overwatch's balance or design team, even nowadays, is it feels like there's rarely a vision for what they want a hero to do. If you look at the state of Lifeweaver, it kind of just felt like all they could think about when they were designing him was his lore and like bringing those abilities and characteristics to life through a character, but they weren't necessarily thinking about gameplay. I kind of feel like 𝐒𝐈𝐓 fell into this problem too. And this is where the hero design problem begins to come in. Now not all of the heroes are that bad. I think 𝐒𝐈𝐈 is not that bad. We do need to rework her pylon. I think 𝐒𝐒𝐑 is also pretty fine. Just remove invulnerability from Suzu, and there's ways to approach these characters that we might say that, well, this is just bad game design, which I do agree with. I've been ranting about it on this channel for a pretty long time, but I kind of wanted to come down and give some reasonable takes here. No shouting, no screaming, no going crazy and all over the place. Just some level-headed takes here. And if we move over to 6v6 or we stay in 5v5, the balance team has to accept that this weird philosophy that they seem to have, that they can make every character competitively viable, this is just not going to happen. And a character, with all due respect to the people that play these characters, a character with such a low skill ceiling like Moira and Lifeweaver shouldn't ever be able to get the same value as characters like Ana and Zenyatta, or perhaps arguably even more. Nowadays, Moira and even Lifeweaver, at least in the casual games, gets more values than your casual average Zenyatta or Ana player, which is extremely depressing to see, because then that Ana or Zenyatta player just feel inclined that, well, why should I put so much effort into learning this game when I could just play something that's easier? And we're also seeing this problem within the tank role itself, that, okay, well, why put effort to learn it in the game when you can just pick 𝐒𝐈𝐓 or Orisa and kind of go do your thing, or Roadhog. Now, to be fair, they've dealt with the Hog and Orisa problem. 𝐒𝐈𝐓's still a problem. I don't think he's that bad, but I do agree that he is a little bit over the top. He doesn't need some insane nerf. He just needs to be toned down a little bit. But even if we were to bring these tanks, over into 6v6, there's a question that was asked in my stream that I wanted to discuss. People were like, well, how would you tone some of these characters down with their AoE, defensive abilities for the tanks? And I would say, just make them single target. Like Junker Queen's shout only affects her, and then 𝐒𝐈𝐓's, command, like whatever his cardiac arrest or whatever he goes through when he presses E, it should only affect him. It's kind of similar to the way Zarya's bubbles used to work as well. If you guys remember, Zarya's bubbles were, one for herself, one for her teammate, but she only ever had one bubble for herself. And, it wasn't like, it isn't like what it is now, where it's been reworked to be a little bit more flexible and versatile in the way that it is used, especially with, if you know how to do the 3-bubble loop, it can definitely feel a little bit oppressive sometimes. So, my take on all of this is, I do think Blizzard has dug themselves into a little bit of a hole, because no matter what happens, when you start talking about 5v5, when you start talking about 6v6, at the end of the day, you're not going to make anybody happy. And I think Blizzard has to realize and understand this, that going forward, they just cannot say something silly like, you think you want it, but you don't, or yeah, but it's not going to solve queue time problems, or it's too late to go back. There's a bunch of arguments that they could make that I talked about a little bit more in depth on the live stream, where I have this fear that they may say something like this and the community would explode over it. And I really want Overwatch to start collecting more big dubs. They've taken L after L after L, and some of them have been well deserved, but it's kind of time where you get kind of tired of, damn, this game, I wish it could like really pop off and do something that makes the, not just our community, but the people that are like from the outside looking into, hey, what's Overwatch doing? And it's like, hey, Overwatch is doing this crazy thing and it's actually really nice. I look at Fortnite, I look at the other games and what they're doing, other live service games, and they're always doing something, interesting and crazy. But you turn over to Overwatch and it's like, well, we're kind of doing the same thing. There's nothing really changing. We're afraid to really delve into what has kind of ruined this game, which arguably is AoE healing. And there's just so many ways, man, so many things I can talk about. But you know what? I'm interested in hearing your perspective as we go forward with 5v5 and 6v6. Where do you think we need to go? And if we were to stay in 5v5, I do want to bring up this discussion point. If we were to stay in 5v5, what do you think needs to be done in order to make 5v5 feel healthier? I'm going to post, a video very soon where I'll talk about the honest and dishonest heroes and why they are perceived this way by the more, high-ranking players and things like that, and why, there are certain characters, if we will stay in 5v5, we need to keep these characters on the weaker side for the game to feel better. And of course, not everybody's gonna like hearing like, oh, why does Lifeweaver needs to be weaker? Why does Moira needs to be weaker? We'll talk about that when the time comes. But and again, like I said, it's not gonna make anybody happy. But I do think, on the topic about the development team, speaking about 6v6 and 5v5, I've always been open-minded to everything they've done. I don't think I've necessarily overreacted to anything they did when it was announced. I gave it a chance and then I gave my takes on it in individual videos. But I do believe that there was a Reddit AMA that they did a while back where somebody did ask, are you confident that you'll solve the tank problem? And their response to that question was them basically dodging it. And I really hope that, this discussion that we might have about 5v5 and 6v6 from Aaron's point of view and his team's point of view, they really don't beat around the bush. If they don't want to do 6v6, if they don't think 6v6 is worth it, they should just outright say that, hey, look, that was that team's thing. We believe in 5v5. That's fine. Like, just put the nail in the coffin and end this debate once and for all. And however, after ending this debate, you need to show some sort of confidence that you can do better going forward. This is the important thing. It's hard to have confidence in a balance or, development team when when there's really nothing to show. Like, we lost the PvE. We even had a game mode removed in recency because it just didn't perform to their expectations. We've had hero identities go all over the place. Balance is all over the place. Although granted, this season's balance is considerably better than the rest of the 5v5 balance patches we've had. It's still, the bar is really low. But my point is, and only one thing I'm going to say before I end this video about the whole 6v6, 5v5 topic. People say that, well, nobody's going to want a Q tank. There's just one argument I want to make. When we were in 6v6, people wanted to play the Rein Zaryas, people wanted to play Winston Divas, people wanted to play these type of compositions. Around the time we lost a bunch of tank players, and you can trace it back to a lot of these forum posts on Blizzard's website, is you had a lot of these traditional tank players just saying that they didn't want to play characters like Orisa and Sigma. They were boring. And the problem with that double shield meta that overstayed its welcome was it did harm the tank player base a lot. Now, the current problem, we're seeing it happen again too, where these really boring, like very thoughtless tank playstyles like Mauga, Orisa, Hog, they've been the one kind of taking over the game, and tank, popularity or tank population has dropped again. So again, I ask Blizzard to, regardless whether you stay in 5v5 or 6v6, the reason perhaps tank can feel miserable to play is you constantly choose to keep the bad tanks that people don't like to play with, against, or even as, that perhaps only a niche of your audience might enjoy. You choose to make these tanks more viable than the tanks that people actually enjoy to play. It is no surprise that people enjoy playing characters like Reinhardt, Winston, Mauga, Junker Queen, Zarya, these type of more traditional tanks that have a little bit more honest gameplay loop. But when you have characters like Orisa and Roadhog, Mauga taking over the game that don't necessarily need that much more, they just have really boring playstyles and really boring hero designs that doesn't really encourage the player to think outside of the box. I guess that's what I'm trying to say here. So doesn't matter which format we go to, they have to reevaluate how they're balancing this game, because they just cannot go in this world where they think they can balance this game perfectly. They must balance it from which characters are considered honest and which are considered dishonest. Aaron did mention this in his blog post, where he said he was surprised that the community is more receptive when Reinhardt has a like a 60% win rate, but when Roadhog has it, the community doesn't like it when Roadhog has it. And it's just kind of like, first of all, it's surprising that they're learning this just now, quote unquote, but it would be interesting if they took the time to understand why that is the case. A character like Reinhardt having a high win rate makes sense, or people being more open to it makes sense, because Rein is still an honest character that doesn't somewhat bypass the loop of what makes a good tank hero design. Roadhog, on the other hand, I think I can summarize it all, and he's a fat DPS, and that's a problem with him, and that's kind of something we're seeing with a little bit with Orisa and Mauga in their designs as well, is that they're just fat DPSs that can outlive you and then take over the game by just destroying every other tank. So, that's just some food for thought. Like I said, I would love to hear your guys' takes on 6v6. If we go to 6v6, what can be done? If we stay in 5v5, I'm more interested to hear some ideas about, well, if we stay in 5v5, how can we make 5v5 feel better, especially, you know, approaching the tank role, since that is the biggest problem Overwatch faces, you know, today. So with that being said, everybody, if you want to support the channel for free, all you have to do is like and subscribe. And of course, if you want to support the channel financially, all you have to do is check out my Patreon. I give coaching for all roles. It doesn't just have to be for damage heroes. I coach support, and I coach tank as well. So if you're interested in the way I teach the game and the way I approach things, then feel free to check out the Patreon, and I appreciate it. With that being said, I will see you in the next video.